You guys ready?
Yeah. Question, please.
Media? Media? No, wait. Media. Should they speak on the speaker stand?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So you speak over there. So yeah, we have an affirmative A of H of B on the negative side, Texas. Today's debate will be judged by myself. My name is Georgi, that's Esther, and that's Anastasia. So if everything's alright, we would like to invite the first affirmative speaker to open the debate in the motion defending. So, go ahead. I will also time your speech, so.
Opponents ready?
Yes.
Judge ready?
Yeah.
In today's world, justice is key. The right to privacy is important in today's world. It is the key thing. Hi, my name is Jay Han, and I'm first affirmative speaker for today's round. And first, let's define several key terms in today's resolution. Ban social media sites keep info from employers and employees, and employers will face a penalty for trying to check applicants' Facebook and other social media profiles. Profiles, pictures, statuses, locations, interests, and media you are tagged in. Profiles are different from background checks. The burden of the affirmative in today's round is that we don't have to ban background checks, but to show that there is no justification for why employers should be allowed to snoop around in possible employees' private lives. Observation 1. In today's society, people don't know when enough is enough for going through technology. Now onto our contentions. Contention 1. Social media profile is not an accurate representation of your professional behavior. What is the point of an interview? It isn't to know how funny an individual is, but it's to find out their skills, their abilities in the professional world. How else would the employer be able to hire them? As we can see, they will obviously look towards the professional behavior. They will not look towards their private lives. That's why we should that's the point of an interview. Now, the interview allows an employer to see how an employee would conduct their behavior in a professional setting. Facebook, Instagram, Foursquare, Twitter, etc., other social media sites would not be an accurate example. Not only do they not represent how an individual is in the professional setting, but it's also a misrepresentation. For example, if an individual was covered in tattoos from head to toe, they would obviously not be hired as well as compared to someone who was not. Therefore, we can see that if that was the case and that was seen through their social media profiles, then obviously the employer's first reaction would be one saying, "Oh, this person does not seem very good of a person," but they are only that's all based off assumption. We cannot allow for this to happen. As it would be obvious in an interview, that individual would make themselves presentable. They would make themselves more appealing towards their interviewer in order to be hired for the job. Therefore, we can see that it will ultimately not allow for people to be hired into their working spectrum. Now moving on to the second contention. The right to violate privacy is not justified as a result of growing technology. Just because there is more technology and is more accessible to see other people, that does not mean the right to privacy should be violated. Before the media existed in history, employers would be able to assess the skills, the abilities, the capability of a person in a professional setting just by an interview. So what makes today different? There is no difference. This is why we do not need to have these people, the employers, look at the person's own social media, and that's why the affirmation believes that it should be banned. The right to privacy is to not be violated because one's own privacy should be kept away from the employer when an individual clearly does not want to, because there are huge differences between the private and the public and the professional world. As we can see in the private life, one person may be different than how they would work in their professional setting. In the professional setting, they will obviously just do their job, show that they have the skills to do their job, and instead, in the private life, they may be one who is more interactive with the world versus in the professional setting, one that is more close into their own world working. Therefore, we can't have social media in this kind of scenario. And also, secondly, it would ultimately lead to higher rates of privacy invasiveness. As we can see, in a similar principle, it would ultimately lead to surveillance within within the employee's home. Though it is not the exact same and it's not as obvious in today's scenario, it is the exact same principle. We are violating their right to privacy behind their back. They won't know. And that's ultimately, by negating, that's the path we're going down. Now, for our third contention, invading the right to privacy facilitates discrimination. In many cases in today's world, there are people that have different views than others in society. They may have different political views, they may have different social views, they may have different religious views, they may have different interests, they may have different dislikes, they may have different likes. Therefore, we can't go with the negation. As we can see, political views can highly impact someone. For example, if an employee was highly conservative but their employer was highly liberal, and they found out, maybe they would not allow them to be hired. Secondly, if someone was an extreme believer in Christianity and the employee was atheist, then they would not hire them as well, though they have the required skill set. Sexual orientation, if someone was a strong believer in Christianity or in another group that is against homosexuals, bisexuals, etc., then that would ultimately allow for more discrimination in the workplace. Likes, dislikes, and interests ultimately would be similar, as we can see. Therefore, because there would be discrimination through invasiveness, there would be, it's not morally correct to violate the right to privacy, and because social media profiles' existence do not facilitate more invasiveness to right to privacy, we strongly urge an affirmative vote. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker, for your speech. Nigga, do you need time?
Yes, we'll take 30 seconds. Stop time.
Cool.
Where do we stand for CX?
Sorry?
Where was the stand for CX?
Yeah, over there.
Time.
Got you.
Okay, so do you have a Facebook?
Yes.
What's the privacy setting on your Facebook?
It's defaulted.
Defaulted. So do you know what the default setting on the privacy of Facebook is?
No.
Basically, if I search up your name and I found out which country you're from, I could basically go on your wall and look at all the posts that you've had.
Okay.
So how is it infringing on privacy if someone who barely even knows you is actually bagging with questions right now can log on to your Facebook and find out all that you've done back when you first started making Facebook?
Well, that's not really the matter. It's still a right to privacy that one has.
So how am I infringing on your privacy if I'm just logging on your Facebook account, which is obviously open for everyone to see since it's on default setting?
Well, not everybody. Well, first off, some people may have different preferences. Definitely, some people do not want to consent, and even though one may leave it on default settings, they may not want to consent.
Okay, so if it's not on consent setting and I somehow find a way around it, what happens to me? Do I get reprimanded?
Well, according to our definition, yes. If we go.
Okay, so what is recommendation if I were to access your Facebook and look at your wall without your consent?
In the affirmative.
Either world.
Okay. In the affirmative world, it would, under our definition, we can see that there would be fines.
So has this ever happened before? Is there been someone who's been? I'm moving to another question. So, on your contention 3, you say that it encourages biases to affirm, correct? Such as
yes,
race,
discrimination,
religion. So I'm still trying to get over the fact that if it's all out there for everyone to see, how is it encouraging biases?
Because what we're saying is that it's not all out there to see because there's a difference between the private life and the professional life. Because
okay, but let's just say, I mean, this happened today. What if my employer would look me up on Facebook and see that I'm drinking alcohol?
then obviously they would have a bad they would obviously have a bad view on you.
Okay.
That's
So if you do bad things, shouldn't you be reprimanded for that, for those things?
not necessarily.
So let's just say that you're an alcoholic. Wouldn't that affect your work environment?
Well, that's different because obviously you're not going to be able to just drink alcohol.
So you're saying as long as the thing that's happening on your Facebook isn't bad, we don't need to worry about it. But if it is bad, then we do need to.
No, that's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that first off,
So
there's
you're saying that if it's a bad thing, let's say that you see me on Facebook smoking pot when I'm working at, let's say as a lifeguard, then you're saying that they shouldn't take a closer look at me?
well, that's a completely different scenario because that's already illegal itself. That's not.
Okay, well, let's say that I was, let's say I'm let's say I'm at age of drink and I was drinking heavily.
Okay.
And I come to work and I have a hangover.
Well, then that's a different scenario because like if the employer, him or herself, doesn't believe.
Okay, so but what I'm trying to get at is, does it matter if the things I do in my personal life affect my private life?
It's the responsibility of the employee to be appropriate in their professional life.
All right, thank you.
Thank you both. You got any time?
I'd just let the time run.
Sure.
Yeah, but cool. How long was that?
Just a second. That would be 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. Is this what you want?
Sorry?
Is this where I need to be standing here?
I can't hear you.
Is this where I need to be standing right here? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Media, is that good?
It's just a tad dark.
If you want to, you can turn on the lights behind you.
Actually, never mind. I'll be fine.
I'm curious if it's dark for you. You can turn on the lights. Disregard lights, media, whatever. It's important for you to read your notes. So if you need light, you can turn it.
Okay. Where are the lights? In case.
Behind you, yeah, somewhere over there, some of those. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that is actually a lot better. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. The opponent's ready? Yes. Team? Judges? All right. Just as a brief roadmap, I'd just like to construct on my case and then go on to attacking my opponent's case. As a negative in today's round, my team and I will be standing in firm negation of the resolution. Employers should be banned checking applicants' Facebook and other social media profiles. On to my first contention. Contention one, a different perspective. Looking at an applicant's social media provides you a different representation of someone's life and how they act in their behaviors. Without this representation, we will never really get into how this future employee or prospective of employee will act with different people and how their interactions will go on with other people. The duty of the employer is actually just to be able to see their prospective employee from all these different perspectives, considering that they're trying to find the best outcome for their job. And if you are trying to, let's just say, hire a cashier at McDonald's, you don't want someone who actively flames other people on their social media. On to my contention two. I'd like to give you a real life example of how social media and what goes on in social media is actually very important considering their interactions with other people. I'd like to talk about Anthony Weiner, who was running for governor in New York. And Anthony Weiner had, just like any other politician, very clean, no criminal record, very clean slate as media profiles and all that, until they started looking at his Twitter. Anthony Weiner posted several pictures of, nude pictures of himself on his Twitter, and that has slandered his reputation. But is this necessarily a bad slandering? It is not, because now we're seeing that how bad of a person this person is and how we don't want this person to represent not only our state but our country. This goes to show that this not only is it should be, but it should be needed, because you never know who are these people until you really look into their personal lives. Also, I'd like to talk about how our work environment is, our working lives are about just as well affected as are affected by our personal lives. And this is actually going to turn into an attack on my opponent's case where they talked about, in their contention one, the inaccuracies of their personal life versus their working life. I'd first off like to say, if employers previously did not believe that personal lives did not factor into their working lives, then why do we have drug tests? Why do we have criminal checks? Why do we have these background checks into their lives if we're not looking at their personal lives? Drug testing, that has nothing to do with your working life. If you do drugs or not, that does not affect your working life directly. It maybe on your interactions, how you, your work ethic. But, sorry. But it is definitely always has been taken into account what their personal life is like. Onto their contention too, where they talk about privacy. Facebook is not the place to pretend you have a private life. When you put something onto Facebook, not only are your hundreds of friends seeing it, but of course your employer not only likely will check it before when you are applying, but also you're going to talk to your employer over Facebook if needed while you're working for them. The fact that we're trying to argue if Facebook is a private place or not is just ridiculous, to be honest, because it is not only can you set your privacy on Facebook, but also it's just not even your property once you start posting these things. Onto their contention 3, which I am finding to be the least topical of all their arguments, because discrimination of a person and what their background life is like is not unique to social media. Whether if I was a liberal or conservative, that doesn't mean I'm not a liberal or conservative because of my social media profile. I was a liberal or conservative regardless. And if I was in my workplace and I was found out to be a liberal or conservative, they would know that anyways, and it's not unique to this topic. where specifically we're talking about checking Facebook and other social media profiles. That's just who you are, and of course they're going to know who you are. And as I've said before in my previous attack, your personal life definitely affects and is taken into the same account as your working life, because these employers don't need to hire someone that they don't think is fit for their job, which links back to our contention one, where these employers need these different perspectives of someone to have the best fit for their job. I'm sorry. Okay, and just to wrap the speech up, I'd just like to recap on everything that's been said. I like to point out how our contention one directly refutes with their contention one, saying that how these different perspectives are actually needed and always been taken into account regardless of social media or not. And social media definitely does not provide an inaccurate representation of a person, because whether or not your personal life or your working life, you're still the same person. And also, Facebook is not the place to pretend you have a private life. That is your personal life, but your personal life is not your private life. And then okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker, for your speech. Sorry? Sure. Right. Sure. It has to be 1 minute 15.
Okay. Would you consider interactions with other employees and customers to find someone as a best fit for their job?
Can you clarify that question?
So, would you consider someone for a job if they didn't interact well with other employees, and if they slandered other employees and were rude to customers?
Absolutely.
Okay then. And do you think that people have a right to privacy?
People do definitely have a right to privacy.
And so how is a personal life different from a private life?
Because your personal life is the sum of your interactions within, whether you're family or friends, but with these different... Okay, first in order for me to answer that question, you have to define what you think is a private life, and what do you think is privacy?
Well, I'm asking you for your definitions because we think they're the same, but in your speech before you stated that there's a clear difference between a personal life and a private life, which we don't see.
Okay, so your personal life is not the same as your private life, because in your personal life it's just out of your workplace. You're with your friends, with your family. But it's not necessarily either of those are private, because none of those are one-on-one interactions. It's with groups of people, which is the same thing as your working life. You're in a professional setting with groups of people.
So if I talk to my family about something that's sensitive, a sensitive issue to me, that's not private,
Are
it's
you doing
personal.
so over Facebook?
I'm instant messaging them either way. Or
Do the employers check your instant messages?
No, okay then, but let's continue.
Okay.
Do people tag you in pictures in Facebook or posts?
Yes.
Do you watch these people? Do you make sure if there's something that you don't like tagged about you? Can you control them? Can you control what they post?
Well, I don't find myself in slanderous or scandalous situations.
Well, maybe you don't, but are you aware that other people might, and it's uncomfortable for them?
Well, they shouldn't have found themselves in that situation in the first place.
So are you blaming these people for having friends that they can't control?
Are you saying that I cannot control my own actions?
No, I'm saying you cannot control other people's actions, because if your friend decides to put up a post tagging you in it as a joke, and it's slanderous and it's mean, but it's not part of you, they tagged you in it though, so
But
what
am
would
I
you
saying
do?
it?
Well, you're part of it, so what if they post something about, oh, let's go do drugs tonight, and then they tag your name in it? You didn't have control with them posting. What would you do in that situation?
So am I not able to reply to them or ask them to take it off because I'm applying for a job at that given time?
Yes, but it's not like your employer
So
goes.
what I'm asking, or what I'm replying with you is it impossible to ask this friend, hey, I'm applying for a job, this is not a joke right now, this isn't funny, or just, do people at ever one point lose their control on their posts?
May I ask another question?
The time's up.
Okay.
Let's do 45 seconds.
Judge ready? Opponents ready? What the affirmative is trying to prove today is that employees should not be banned from background checks, but to show that there is no justification for why employers should be allowed to snoop around a possible employer's private life. First, I'd like to go over my own contentions and then refute our opponents. Our own contentions are social media is an inaccurate representation of your professional behavior. An example of this is Martin Luther King. He cheated on his wife, and yet he was still an amazing public speaker and created positive change in the world. If we go with the negative side and allowed employees or other people to snoop in on his private life, then the outcome of that would be a lot different because people wouldn't trust him, even though he was great at his job, which is what is important to an employer. Also, Winston Churchill is another example. As Prime Minister, he was a drunk rude who always insulted people, but yet he was an amazing speaker, and he motivated the British people and pretty much single-handedly saved England. So these people are great at their jobs, they know what they're doing, and they have the skills needed to participate, but yet their personal lives may be a little iffy. So we should not judge these people just on what happens on their private personal lives, which should be kept to them. Now I'll move on to our second contention. We stated that the right to violate privacy is not justified as a result of growing technology. Just because we slowly have more social media doesn't mean we should start having other checks. Let's say we start inputting cameras in people's homes. The negative would want to have employers to spy on their people at their homes to see how they're behaving in other places because they want different perspectives. They also, our third point was that it is invading privacy facilitates discrimination. This is almost one of the most important points of this debate because on your social media you have different descriptions. Let's say you are a liberal and your employer is conservative. They might not hire you just because you are that. The opponents confused this point because they thought you wouldn't change.
But the thing is, you're putting your information out there. It's a description of who you are, and people can see that and judge you inappropriately, and how that does not affect your job. Let's say your employee is against gays, and you are gay, and you put that on your social media. If you're still a good worker, they will judge you differently, and you will lose the opportunity to be a good worker. As you can see, just because what happens on your personal and private life, where your likes and dislikes are, it does not apply to your job or how you are working. We can see from the two examples of Winston Churchill and Martin Luther King. These two people are amazing at their job, but their personal lives were different. Now I'd like to move on to refuting our opponent's points. They say that normal people can't see default settings, but this isn't true because police and employees can see more details. Facebook allows them to go in to see the profile more detailed. So even if you have your privacy settings all the way up, they'll still be able to see your photos, all the posts that you have, and other things. They also say that private life relates to work. Well, that's not true because interviews are probably the best thing about job interviews. Because you see the person in action, you see how they respond to real life situations, and you see how they are in a working scenario. Private life is completely different. In private life, you're not worried about talking calmly to other people, talking calmly to customers. It's completely different. That's why job interviews are so much better. Furthermore, there are background checks, there are drug tests, there's more than enough things. There's resumes. You can find out all you need about a person's working ability without going onto their social media. This is a complete injustice and invading someone's privacy by going in, and it's completely unnecessary. They said that the duty of an employee is to find the best applicant. We agree with this, but the fact is, by going into someone's social media, it's first ineffective because it doesn't relate, as I stated. And furthermore, you can find out better from resumes, from background checks, from an actual real-life interview where the person is acting like they would in a real job scenario. They also say that people like the governor would represent us badly, but if you relate this back to my examples of Martin Luther King and Winston Churchill, these two people had personal lives that weren't the best, but they were great at their job. So this governor too could have made a very positive change in his nation. They also say that working lives are affected by personal life. Well, even if this is true, then the employer can see this. They can see this from the way they act in the interview. If you're high during the interview, the employee is just going to be like, oh, I didn't see your Facebook, so I assume that you'd be a good worker. You can see by the job interview, you can see by background checks if the person is a good worker or not. You don't need to invade their privacy to find that out. They also said that you can set your privacy on Facebook, but again, employees and other people can circumvent that privacy setting to see all your information. So this point is completely irrelevant. They stated that discrimination is not unique because social media doesn't change, but they mistook our point for something else because we're not saying that your opinions would change. We're saying that you're putting your opinions out there. You're saying that you're liberal. You're saying that you're straight or gay, and other employers can see that and affect your job interview badly. They said that you're still the same person, even though you have a different personal and private life, but this is not true, as I stated in my two examples and many others. Your working life is completely different from your personal life. For these reasons, we believe that the invasion of privacy is not justified and should be banned. Thank you.
I'm just going to take my time for something.
Yeah, there's a cross. There's a cross.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Okay.
1 minute 40.
Yeah. Left or I used?
You used it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay. You do know that employers do not have the same capabilities as police when it comes to circumventing security, right?
No, they do. Like banks and other high quality employers have that ability.
How? Can you explain that to me, how they have the ability with something that usually needs a police warrant to do?
It's Facebook. Facebook is a company. They can ask that company to reveal the information.
And why?
Facebook is different than a warrant that like going into someone's house.
Okay. So you said in your speech that the personal life has nothing to do with your working life.
Yes, it's completely different. You can act differently in your personal life and still be an excellent worker in your professional life.
Okay, so let's say if I smoked weed in my personal life, so that has nothing to do with my working life.
Yeah, well, if you did come to work high, then the employer would just
that was
fire
my
you.
question. Like, does that affect my working life?
Well, in that
Now, I'm not coming to work high or anything, but does that affect my working life if I just smoke weed?
if you're not coming to work high, then it would not affect your working life.
So why do companies regularly employ drug tests?
Because you just stated that you're not coming to work high, but these drug tests are to find people who are high during work or who are on drugs.
So you're saying when you apply for a job, there's no drug test, not even a hair test that reaches back to 6 months?
I never said that.
Okay, I know. Okay. So when you post something on Facebook, how many people do you expect to see it?
It depends on how many friends you have.
Okay, so how many friends do you have?
About 700.
Is that private?
These are friends that I hold very dear. I don't think it's in your place to say if they're...
No, I wasn't saying if it was private. I was just asking if you think 700 people is a private scenario.
Yeah, I would say those are people that I trust, people that are my friends.
Okay, so 700 people is private. Okay. Was Martin Luther King Jr. being employed by anyone?
Well, he was a worker. He did something. That's
He was
what.
just
That's
a
what.
worker, but was he being employed? The topic asks for applicants from an employer.
You're ignoring the point that he was still good at what he did. He's still good, and he has the skill.
No, I recognize Martin Luther King Jr. is an amazing man, or was an amazing man, but did he have a job?
I guess his job was to promote civil rights.
Okay. And then also, let's say if I were, let's say 20 years from now, I cheated on my wife, am I going to put that on Facebook?
Well, you'd see if you're in a relationship status, then you could see that.
Okay. So you're saying that if I cheated my wife, or what was your example? Winston Churchill?
Winston Churchill, he was a rude drunk.
Okay. So I could see how that might get onto your Facebook, but also no. So, but why would that give me means to post about me being a rude drunk? Why would I say I'm a rude drunk, or here, let me yell at people on Facebook?
That's the point that our side is actually hitting on. That friends and other people that you cannot control can post things that would detriment you and ruin your personal image. If your friends took a picture of you drunk and posted it on Facebook, it would be there, and people would still see it.
Okay, thank you.
You're in New Zealand, you have 4 minutes.
Okay, we're just gonna run this aside. question, Ramses?
2 minutes. That's it.
I'm just not going to use the microphone.
That's fine.
I'm just going to take out my timer.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, so is everyone ready then? Can everyone hear me well enough?
Yeah.
Okay then. Starting now. So I'm going to start off on my opponent's case. So start off on the top of my opponent's case. The first contention is that social media is not an accurate representation of these workers. So one, you can classify our first contention that says the direct opposite. That says that social media gives another representation of these applicants in a different situation. And when you are in a job interview, your main incentive is to make yourself look as good as possible. No matter what, if it's true or not, no matter if you're lying or not, your incentive is to make yourself look as good as possible. So when you go to social media, you're not trying to prove anything to anyone else. So social media is a great representation of how someone would act in a different situation, which means that their first contention completely falls, and you will hold our first contention to a higher weight. I'll use the example of a famous saying that a true judge of character is how you are when no one else is looking. So when you are not trying to prove something to someone else, when you're not trying to make yourself look better, how you would act in a normal situation, that is a good representation, and that employer needs to take into account when he's deciding an applicant. So their first contention falls. Now let's go, and they gave an example of Martin Luther King and Winston Churchill. So one, I'll just state that one, it's an isolated example, but also say that Martin Luther King and Winston Churchill are very special individuals that had key benefits and also had talents. So let's look to Martin Luther King. I'll give you an example. If there was another speaker, another civil rights speaker that was just as good as Martin Luther King, and you found Martin Luther King in a situation where he was juggling puppy heads, you would take that other public speaker, you would take that other civil rights activist. But Martin Luther King and Winston Churchill weren't competing in a specific job where the employer has to look at their social media. These examples don't apply in this debate. Now let's go on to their contention 3 by saying, contention 2 and contention 3, they say that their security settings, they use the default, yet that, which means that their security settings on the social media are completely public, yet employers looking at these social media websites are still invading their privacy, even though this is public. This is a direct contradiction. If an applicant makes their social media available to the public, but an employer looks at their social media, then this employer is not violating this applicant's right to privacy, because this applicant already made their information public. Okay, so, and also, I'm just going to move on to my case. So I'm going to reiterate my arguments and also defend my arguments. So our first contention, again, is a different perspective. And it's talking about how social media gives another representation of the applicant and a different representation that shows how the applicants would work in a different situation. So this would be held very high in this debate because an employer's duty is to choose the rightful applicant to make for a certain job. So you have to take in all factors. But when you look at a resume, every resume is designed to be seen at the best situation possible. Not even if it happens all the time, but a best situation that can be possible. So when you look to social media is free. Social media shows how a person would act in a normal situation when not trying to prove anything. And our second contention, we give the example of Anthony Weiner and saying how he was running for governor, and he posted a picture of his, he posted a new picture, and this showed an example of how he was not fitted for this situation. My opponent is saying this is false, but this is true because Anthony Weiner posted this picture when he had nothing to prove. But when he's running for governor and he's trying to prove something, this is where he's trying to appear to be the best, even though this will not happen in a normal situation. He's trying to look to be the best when he actually never does this. But when he posts his new pictures, this is how he actually decides. This is the decision he makes. So you're going to vote affirmative in this round because we try to achieve the better representation, the representation that shows how an applicant would actually operate. And my opponent's attacks to our case really don't stick. They try to in my opponent's CX. When my partner CX my opponents, my partner asked my opponents how many friends he had. My opponent said he had 700 that he truly trusted. But in that previous CX, his partner asked my partner if we can control what happens on social media. Now these two directly contradict because apparently they're trying to say that you can't control what happens on social media, but you can also say that you have trusted friends that you know won't hurt you. So this is completely contradicts themselves, so you will vote affirmative. Or negative, sorry. Negative.
Sorry? Yeah, that would be half a minute.
Do you mind if I okay, awesome. I was amplifying my voice so everyone can hear me.
Ready?
It's
Okay, so in a background check, could someone make themselves look as best as possible, just as how they would in an interview scenario?
Can you explain a little bit?
Would an individual who is receiving a background check, would they try to make themselves the best kind of person possible, make themselves seem as if they aren't doing anything wrong, as if they were?
They would make themselves look like they were like in like the best perfect possibility, even if this never happens.
Okay. Moving on. You said social media shows a person in different situations, correct?
Yeah, different representation, different perspective.
Okay. So, do you agree that work is a different situation from, let's say, a party or a social gathering?
I'm saying, wait.
Do you agree that work is a different situation for an individual than a party or a social gathering?
Yes.
So then, okay. Now, are you aware why background checks are necessary?
Yes, to provide credentials.
Credentials for?
Applying for a set job.
Okay. So, what makes this so different from an interview?
I'm sorry, what?
Does this translate to make it different from an interview?
I don't know where you're going with this.
Okay, never mind. Let's move on then. You said an employer needs to consider an impossible employee's behavior to give him or her a job, correct?
Yes.
So then, what differs their professional life from their personal life? Why can't we just base it off their skill set?
Okay, so look to an interview. In an
Okay.
interview, you're trying to get the job in question. So you will do whatever you possibly can to receive an interview. Even change your representation.
So you're
look
only
to personal, look to social media where you
Yes.
have nothing to prove.
Okay.
So this is you and you're just your normal state.
Okay, so you're basing your scenario only in the time of the interview, correct? Because that's what it seems like. Because that you just said they make themselves the most presentable in the interview, but you never. But that's all you said, right?
Even after the interview.
Even after the interview?
Yes.
Okay. How would we know that the employer wouldn't do anything?
When you wouldn't do anything.
Like, why would they keep them if they found out something was wrong? Unless they kept some kind of appropriate behavior. Isn't it the skill set and not the not the behavior of of the private life, but the skill set, the aptitude to be able to do the
Wait,
job
so are you
itself.
saying that they have no effect on each other? So are you saying that how I act, just when I have nothing to prove, doesn't affect how I'll act in the workplace?
No, that's not really related to my question. I'm just asking whether or not, isn't it the,
I'm saying that they have an effect on each other.
you're saying it has an effect on each other?
Yes.
I'm just asking, isn't it that it's necessary for a person to find the skill set of an employee?
Do I answer?
If you want.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask you a previous question?
You can answer if you want, unless can't answer a question, you can just end the process.
Okay. I don't remember the question very well, so I'm just not going to say it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can we use the remainder of our time?
Yeah. Three minutes. Sorry. 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
I'd like to thank my opponents for their speeches, but first I would like to start off with the impacts of our case, our 3 main points. So, the affirmative's burden was to show that we uphold that there is no justification for employers to snoop around in their possible employees' lives. And we showed that this is an invasion of privacy, like for employers to go onto their employees' Facebooks and other social media things such as Twitter, Instagram, Foursquare, which is actually a social media site that if employers were allowed to see, they could know where you are at any given moment because it lets you check into different locations, which is clearly an invasion of privacy. Not only this, but this allows for discrimination, one thing that my opponents did not address at all. We're saying that when employers do have the ability to look into their possible employees' social sites, that this allows for them to discriminate against them if they are pro-choice or if they're homosexual or if their political views don't match. This can dangerously harm the employee's possibility of getting a job. And my opponent's case stands on the fact that they claim that their employers need to see the employees in a situation when he or she is not trying their best to put on their best face and their best personality. But they clearly contradicted themselves because they said that in interviews, employees will put on their best appearance and they'll try their best to get the job. But then they later say that the employers need to go onto the social media sites because these employees will come back once they get their job and drag in their personal life situations. Like, they said that they would put in their best face during the interview, but then they might come in hungover or high from smoking some kind of drug. So this is a clear contradiction. If the employee was trying hard in an interview, there's no reason for them to come in and just trash themselves and their reputations during work. So we also show that background checks are here. We've shown the difference of background checks and the social media profiles. Background checks are necessary because employees do not have control over what information is collected on them for background checks. And these background checks provide the information necessary for the employer to know if the employee will interact responsibly and safely with others around them and the customers that they work with, including drug tests and criminal records and things of sexual assault. And my opponents also stated that these drug tests are unnecessary because drugs don't directly affect how an employee works, but they affect how these people interact with their other employees and the customers. But obviously, as they stated before in a cross-examination, this is a very important factor of why people get chosen. They will get chosen because of how they interact with other people, and they will get chosen because they show that they're kind and they don't slander people. But what they're saying is that drug tests are unnecessary because it shows employees do this or they do not slander people. So we're saying that background checks provide the information necessary for employers to know if their employees will conduct themselves respectably and responsibly in a working situation. And going onto these social media sites will allow the employers to infringe on their privacy by finding out their more personal opinions and their more personal orientations, like the sexual orientation. You do not need to know if your employee is homosexual. As long as they work well, they conduct themselves well in a working situation. And if that harms the employee's chances of getting a job, then it's even worse than just infringing onto their privacy. It's also hurting their life in the long run. So as we can see, these things are it's not necessary for employers to go on social media sites and track down their employees and see their opinions, their likes, what sports teams they like, their political views. And in fact, we've shown that background checks provide enough of this information and that employers don't need to snoop into their employees' lives because this is just harming the employee further because social media sites are different from the way you conduct yourself in an interview or the way you conduct yourself in work. Social media sites are places where you connect with family and friends, and even then we've shown that you can't control all your friends. And even though my opponent stated that we did contradict ourselves, we did not. We just said that, my partner just said that he has a lot of friends. He did not say that he can control all of his 700 friends. He simply stated that he has 700 friends. So we're not contradicting ourselves. We're showing that social media is a place where you connect with your family and your friends and other people, but it doesn't mean that this is what your employer should base you on. The employer should base you on how you conduct yourself at work and how you try your best at work to make sure that you are doing a good job. They shouldn't care if you are pro-life or pro-choice or whatever your political orientations are. And for those reasons, we strongly urge an affirmative vote.
Can we have the rest of the time?
Sure. That would be 1 minute 50 seconds.
That's it. There and just started on the microphones.
Okay.
Okay, hear me? We good? Alright.
Yeah. Just say, Nita, можешь поставить его прямо с микрофона?
For a brief about basically we're going over the major arguments. I'm going to finish off on I think besides this case. Alright, first thing we're going to talk about Facebook. Facebook is the main thing here that we're trying to skewer onto their side. What we're trying to get through to everyone on the affirmative side is this. Okay, so we've been trying to illustrate on the negative side that if the employer finds bad information online, it's not their fault. It's open to everyone. It's not hidden in the lockbox in your drawer in your house. They're not invading your privacy. If you're putting it online, what's online stays online. You should know better. If I'm going to put a picture of me doing something stupid, I'm not going to put it on Facebook if I have a job I don't want to lose. That is not the fault of the employer. If they find something online, you can't blame someone for finding something bad. That makes you ignorant. That doesn't make you intelligent. That doesn't make them bad people. That makes them smart for you being dumb for putting something that they can find online so easily. And let's face facts, Facebook is not a very closed-knit circuit. Now, background checks. That's something that we're going to have to go a bit harder into. Background checks aren't as effective as we reviewed with our second contention. You bring up politicians. Politicians are generally the same around the world. They seem like great people because they have generally clean records. When it comes down to it, these are bad people. Politicians in the United States are engaged in drug trafficking, human trafficking, prostitution. These are not good people. But if you look at their background checks and the drug tests, they're amazing people. They're saints. They have nothing wrong with them. That doesn't tell you about their character. What we're talking about is trying to find out the true nature of these people. You're not going to find that from the drug test, or you're not going to find that from the criminal record, because they're not going to have one. That's what we're trying to talk about on the negative side. Now our opponents contradict themselves. I'm going to try to hammer it as much as possible. The second speaker on the affirmative side, he said that he has 700 friends on Facebook, and then he said that you can't. They said in an earlier speech that you cannot control what people put on Facebook. Our first speaker then asked him, so can't you control your friends? He's like, oh yeah, these are trusted friends. That's exactly what he said in that CX. These are trusted friends. Let's say a broad topic of trusted friends. If I have friends that I trust, I've known my best friend for 15 years, he's not going to put anything online that he knows will hurt me, whether it's a joke or not. He's going to know better. So if his 700 friends are trusted, as he says, he has nothing to worry about. That's what we're saying. These 700, 500, I have 800 friends. I don't trust half of them worth of crap. That is not what we're saying here. Facebook is not something that is private. Facebook is about as unprivate as you can possibly be. And if you put something bad on Facebook, that is not on the employees. That is on you. Now, I'm going to talk about what I think is the deciding factor of this debate. Contention 1, affirmative. Contention 1, negative. This is a big roundhouse punch, a big kick to the face, and I think that we win it. The reason why I think that we win it is because social media, as I said before, is an amazing representation of who you really are. Me standing in front of you, I'm wearing a hoodie, I'm just chilling out right now, I'm just like a very eloquently and affluent speech, so I like to think so. This is not me all the time. I don't talk like this. I don't use words like tyrannical all the time. I'm not a debate kid all the time. This is the farce that you see of me right now. Maybe you like it, hopefully you do, but this isn't really Nate Carter. That's what we're trying to talk about here. The person that you see in that interview, that little 1 hour of speech, he makes him an amazing person. But that is not the person you are hiring. That is a person that he puts on for you to see. That is not the person that you're going to get for those 5, 6, 10 years of service. There are going to be bad days. There are going to be days where he has had a fight with his wife, and he's going to act exactly the same as he does every single other day. I don't think so. If I fight with my mom, I'm not going to be happy the entire day. It's just going to affect me. It's just human nature. I can't just tone out emotions. We're not robots. That's what we're saying. If we're robots, then this is true. If we are robots and we can tone out emotions like it's no big deal, we can take death, trauma, all those things like there's no big problem, then yes, our opponents win the case, they win the contention one, and we lose. But we are human beings. We know what we feel. We cannot turn out these things. We experience these things, and these things affect us. And that's what we're saying on the negative side, is that us as human beings have no ability to shut out things that can affect us in such traumatic ways. If someone dies in my family, I'm not going to be happy-go-lucky at work. Even if my job requires me to smile every single day, all the time of the day. It's not going to happen. It's going to affect me. We're not robots. That's what we're trying to achieve on the negative side. So, as a brief moment, the major arguments are opposed to contradict themselves in the fact that Facebook is not a private institution. I don't care what anyone says. I've seen too many people put dumb stuff on Facebook and pay for it later. If you're going to be smart and keep your bad things hidden, put it in the box. Don't take a picture of it at all. Do not put it online, let alone Facebook, which has 500 of your so-called friends that you trust. So, for all these reasons, I urge you to make the ballot.
I'd like to thank the speaker and also like to thank both of the teams for a wonderful debate. If you could just cross the floor, shake hands, and give us a number to discuss the decision.
You're just giving to Susie.